I think there are different things that we can find ways to say, no, like we certainly deserve that and we're not going to compromise on that, and then other things that we can probably compromise on. But like I said, like this is the biggest moment in the history of the WNBA, and I don't want that to be forgotten. Similar, like it's important that we find a way to play this next season, and I think our fans and even everybody that has played in this league that has come before us.
Can we just give it up for Caitlin Clark's answer? Thank you, Caitlin. This is the biggest moment the WNBA has ever seen, and it's not something that can be messed up. I feel like I have been screaming this at the top of my lungs through all of the messiness that has happened over the past 2 seasons in the WNBA. You have a moment right now in women's basketball, and specifically in the WNBA. You have a boom that we have never seen in the history of this league. Do whatever you can to not mess it up, and
There's a sentence no league executive ever wants circulating in public, especially not when momentum is at an all-time high. But it was said anyway, quietly, calmly, and by the one person everyone is watching. Caitlin Clark didn't raise her voice. She didn't accuse anyone. She didn't threaten anything. But what she said exposed a truth the WNBA has been trying to outrun for months. January 9th isn't just a date on a calendar, it's a countdown. And once it hits 0, there may be no undo button. Here's the unsettling part. From the outside, it looks like the WNBA is thriving. Packed arenas, record ratings, jerseys flying off shelves. Social media flooded with highlights that finally cut through the noise of men's sports. But behind the scenes, something doesn't line up. Because while fans were celebrating the most explosive season the league has ever seen, the people in charge went silent. No victory lap, no "we did it" moment, no clear message about the future. Just closed-door meetings stretching deeper into the offseason while the clock kept moving. That silence is what makes this moment dangerous. Growth in sports doesn't die with a bang. It dies when momentum stalls and nobody notices until it's gone. And right now, the league is operating as if time is a luxury, as if negotiations can drag on without consequence, as if fans who just showed up in record numbers will patiently wait if games suddenly disappear. That assumption could be the most expensive mistake in women's basketball history. What makes this even more uncomfortable is who ended up saying the quiet part out loud. Not a veteran on the way out, not a union executive, not a talking head on TV. A 22-year-old rookie who just finished the most scrutinized debut season the league has ever seen. Someone who had every reason to stay neutral, protect her brand, and let others take the heat. Instead, she acknowledged something most people are afraid to admit, that no matter how justified the demands are, none of it matters if basketball stops. This isn't just about contracts or flights or revenue formulas buried in legal language. This is about timing, about a fragile window that just opened and could slam shut just as fast. The WNBA finally has mainstream attention, and that attention is impatient. Curious fans don't wait through labor disputes. Casual viewers don't follow press releases. They move on. And once they do, getting them back is almost impossible. That's why January 9th feels different. Because if the league misreads this moment, it won't just lose a season. It risks losing the trust, curiosity, and excitement that took decades to build. And once you see how close everything is to tipping one way or the other, you start to understand why that one sentence mattered so much. And the deeper you dig into what's happening behind closed doors, the harder it becomes to ignore what's really at stake. When the 2024 season ended, something strange happened. Or more accurately, something didn't happen. There was no grand celebration from league leadership, no bold press conferences framing the year as a turning point, no coordinated message about what came next. For a league that had just experienced the most explosive growth in its history, the response was oddly muted, almost cautious. And for fans who were paying attention, that silence was louder than any headline. Think about how this usually works. When a sports league breaks records, it doesn't stay quiet. It sells the story. It floods the media cycle with optimism, long-term plans, and confident projections. But after 2024, the WNBA seemed to retreat inward. Interviews became carefully worded. Public appearances slowed. Conversations shifted away from momentum and toward ongoing discussions. That's not how victory laps sound. That's how damage control begins. What makes this even more unsettling is how perfectly the silence lined up with the calendar. As soon as the season wrapped, the focus quietly shifted to labor talks that had been simmering in the background for months. Negotiations that were supposed to feel routine suddenly stretched deeper into the off-season. December arrived, then January crept closer, and still nothing concrete reached the public. No reassurance, no clarity, just vague acknowledgments that talks were productive while deadlines kept approaching. Fans felt it before they could explain it. The comment sections filled up with the same uneasy question, phrased 100 different ways. Why does this feel different? Why does it feel like something's being avoided? When a league is confident, it doesn't hide. It sets the narrative. And right now, the narrative was being shaped by absence, not leadership. The timing couldn't be worse. This wasn't a normal off-season lull. This was the moment when new fans were deciding if the WNBA was something they'd stick with or just a temporary fascination. Momentum in sports is fragile, especially when it's newly earned. Miss the chance to reinforce it, and interest fades quietly. No outrage, no backlash, just fewer people showing up when the games return.
That's why the silence matters so much. It suggests uncertainty. At the exact moment certainty is required. It hints that the league knows how high the stakes are, but isn't ready to say how close things are to the edge. And when leaders go quiet during a boom, it usually means the problems behind closed doors are bigger than anyone wants to admit. Because while fans were celebrating sold-out arenas and viral highlights, the foundation holding all of it together was being tested. And the longer that test went unaddressed publicly, the more obvious it became that this wasn't just another negotiation cycle. And once players finally started speaking up, that uneasy feeling started to make a lot more sense. The moment everything shifted didn't happen during a game or a press release. It happened quietly, inside a practice gym, when Caitlin Clark finally stepped back onto the court after weeks of silence. This was her first real public basketball appearance since the season ended, and the timing couldn't have been more loaded. Cameras were rolling, reporters were waiting, and instead of talking about her shot, her conditioning, or her chemistry with Team USA, the questions went straight to the thing everyone had been dancing around. Would there even be a season to come back to? That alone says everything. When a 22-year-old rookie becomes the focal point for questions about the league's future, something is broken in the usual script. This wasn't a veteran leader issuing a calculated statement. This wasn't a union spokesperson speaking in prepared language. This was the most visible player in women's basketball being put on the spot about a crisis she didn't create, but now couldn't escape. She had an easy out. Everyone expected it. A vague answer, a deflection, something polished and safe that said nothing while sounding responsible. That's how these moments usually go, especially for young stars still learning how the league works. But that's not what happened. Clark didn't hide behind PR phrases or talk in circles. She didn't pretend the tension wasn't real. She acknowledged it head-on, and in doing so, broke the unspoken rule rookies are supposed to follow. Instead of choosing a side, she did something far more uncomfortable. She validated the players' fight. Better conditions, fairer compensation, real investment. She didn't dismiss any of it. But then she shifted the conversation in a way that caught people off guard. She pointed out the reality no one wanted to lead with, that basketball itself is the engine, that fans don't show up for negotiations, they show up for games, and without games, everything else collapses. What made her words hit harder wasn't the content, it was the context. This was someone who had just carried unprecedented attention into the league, someone who had been under constant scrutiny since the day she declared, someone whose presence directly translated into sold-out arenas and national broadcasts. If anyone understood how fragile this moment was, it was her, and she spoke like someone who knew exactly how much could be lost. The room felt different after that. because once she said it out loud, it couldn't be ignored anymore. The idea that pushing too hard, too long could cost more than it gains, the possibility that timing matters as much as leverage, and the uncomfortable truth that the league's brightest spotlight was now shining directly on its biggest vulnerability. This wasn't a soundbite meant to stir drama. It was a warning wrapped in calm delivery, and it forced everyone listening to confront a question they'd been avoiding. What happens if the product disappears right when people finally started watching? And once you start unpacking why she was the one saying it, the implications get even bigger. There was one line that cut through everything else. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't confrontational, and that's exactly why it landed so hard. Caitlin Clark made it clear that players deserve what they're fighting for, and then she followed it with something almost no one had been willing to say publicly, that the only way to get there is by playing basketball. No games means no growth means no money, and without money, leverage disappears. That sentence flipped the conversation on its head. Up until that moment, the narrative felt clean and divided. Players versus league, fairness versus finances, right versus wrong. But Clark reframed it as something much messier and much more dangerous. Not a battle over principles, but a race against time. She wasn't questioning whether players should win. She was questioning whether the strategy could backfire at the worst possible moment. What made the line so powerful was who it came from. This wasn't someone fighting for one last contract. This wasn't someone already set financially. This was the face of the league's future, acknowledging that the system only works if the product stays visible, and that visibility is fragile. Fans don't build habits around potential. They build habits around games they can watch tonight, highlights they can share tomorrow, and stars they can follow week after week.
The uncomfortable reality is that labor disputes don't happen in a vacuum. They play out in public, and public attention is ruthless. When games stop, storylines stop. When storylines stop, casual fans drift. And when casual fans drift, the entire growth curve flattens. Clark wasn't minimizing the fight. She was pointing out the cost of losing momentum when momentum is the one thing this league finally has. Her words also exposed something deeper. That leverage in sports isn't just about contracts and deadlines, it's about relevance. Every game played in front of a packed arena strengthens the player's position. Every nationally televised matchup builds value that can be measured, negotiated, and monetized. Remove the games, and suddenly everything becomes theoretical again. And theoretical value is easy to dismiss in boardrooms. That's why the line lingered, because it forced both sides to confront a brutal paradox. Push too hard and risk collapsing the very platform that creates power in the first place. Compromise too quickly and risk locking in terms that feel unfair. There's no clean solution, only trade-offs. And Clark, intentionally or not, articulated that reality in a way no press release ever could. Once that door was opened, it became impossible to close, because if she was right, then the stakes weren't just about this negotiation cycle. They were about whether the league could survive its own breakthrough moment without sabotaging it. And when you start looking at the numbers behind the surge everyone is trying to protect, that warning starts to feel less theoretical and a lot more urgent. To understand why that warning hit so hard, you have to look at what actually happened in 2024. Not the headlines, not the hype, the numbers. Just one season earlier, the WNBA was averaging crowds that felt respectable but modest. Games were attended mostly by core fans, longtime supporters who never left even when the spotlight did. Then something snapped into place, and the league didn't grow slowly, it exploded. The Indiana Fever didn't just lead the league in attendance, they shattered expectations. Night after night, arenas were filled to capacity, not just in Indiana, but on the road. Cities that had never seen sellout crowds for women's basketball suddenly couldn't keep tickets available. That wasn't league-wide marketing magic, that was demand. Real people showing up, paying, and caring. And here's the part that gets overlooked. This surge wasn't built on a single name. Yes, Caitlin Clark was the catalyst, but she wasn't the whole story.
Angel Reese brought a completely different audience with her, a louder, more social media-driven fan base that thrives on rivalry and personality. Every matchup suddenly felt like an event, not just a game. People weren't tuning in out of habit, they were tuning in because it felt like something was happening. And it doesn't stop there. The next wave is already forming. Paige Bueckers hasn't even entered the league yet, and her following is already massive. Juju Watkins is right behind her, pulling in attention that used to skip women's basketball entirely. This isn't normal growth. This is a generational alignment of talent, timing, and visibility that leagues spend decades hoping for. That's why the fear is so real. Moments like this don't wait around. Fans who discover a sport during a cultural spike don't automatically become lifelong supporters. They test it, they sample it, they decide whether it's worth their time. And if the product disappears during that trial period, most of them don't come back. Not out of spite, out of distraction. Sports is ruthless that way. What makes this window even more fragile is how new the attention is. Unlike older leagues that survived lockouts because their fan bases were deeply entrenched, the WNBA is still in the trust-building phase with millions of new viewers. These fans aren't invested in labor history or collective bargaining principles. They're invested in stars, rivalries, and games they can watch on a given night. Remove that, and the emotional connection never fully forms. That's the quiet danger hiding beneath the success. This growth feels powerful, but it's not permanent yet. It needs consistency to harden into loyalty. It needs games, moments, and storylines to turn curiosity into commitment. And everyone involved knows it, which is why the idea of putting all of this on pause, even temporarily, feels less like a negotiation tactic and more like playing chicken with the league's future. Because once you see how much of this momentum depends on staying visible, the next question becomes impossible to avoid. What happens if the games stop right when people finally started watching?
A work stoppage is always risky in professional sports, but for the WNBA, the danger is amplified in ways people don't like to admit. This league isn't operating with decades of unshakable loyalty banked away. It's operating in a moment of discovery. Millions of fans didn't grow up with the WNBA woven into their routines. They found it recently, and that difference changes everything. In older leagues, lockouts hurt but rarely destroy. Fans complain, argue online, and eventually come back because the attachment runs deep. They know the teams, they know the rivalries, they've already committed emotionally. The WNBA doesn't have that luxury yet. A huge portion of the audience that showed up in 2024 is still deciding whether this league becomes a habit or a memory. And habits don't form when the product disappears. This is the part that doesn't show up in press releases. New fans don't wait. They don't follow labor updates. They don't track negotiation timelines. If games stop, they fill that space with something else. Another sport, another league, another form of entertainment that's always available. And once that replacement settles in, it's incredibly hard to pull people back. There's also the media side of this that rarely gets discussed honestly. Coverage follows momentum, not principle. Networks amplify what's happening now, not what might return later. If the season stalls, the spotlight moves on. Highlight packages stop, debate segments disappear, and the same outlets that spent all of 2024 talking about growth quietly reallocate attention elsewhere. When the games eventually return, they don't come back to the same stage. What makes this especially dangerous is that women's sports still fight for consistent visibility. The WNBA just broke through that barrier in a meaningful way. National broadcasts became events. Social media engagement surged. Players became recognizable beyond basketball circles. A work stoppage doesn't just pause that progress, it resets perception. And rebuilding perception is far harder than building it the first time. There's also the psychological effect on fans who did show up. People who bought tickets, learned rosters, followed storylines. When that investment is met with uncertainty, it creates hesitation, not anger, hesitation. And hesitation is deadly for a growing league.
Fans who hesitate are less likely to buy season tickets, less likely to plan trips around games, and less likely to emotionally commit the next time momentum tries to build. That's why this moment is so volatile. The league isn't choosing between short-term discomfort and long-term stability. It's choosing between protecting a fragile breakthrough or risking a setback that could take years to recover from. Growth in women's basketball has always come in waves. Lose one wave, and there's no guarantee another arrives on schedule. And that's what makes the deadline looming in the background feel so heavy. Because this isn't just about whether a season happens on time. It's about whether the league understands how unforgiving this stage of growth really is. And once you look at what January 9th actually unlocks, if no deal is reached, the risk becomes impossible to downplay. January 9th isn't dramatic because of what it says on paper. It's dramatic because of what disappears when that date passes without an agreement. On that day, the current collective bargaining agreement expires, and once it does, the guardrails come off. No automatic protections, no assumed continuity, just uncertainty. The kind that turns quiet tension into real consequences almost overnight. Up until that point, both sides can afford to posture. Statements can stay vague. Optimism can be implied without being proven. But once the deadline hits, leverage changes instantly. The league gains the legal ability to lock players out. Players gain the ability to withhold labor. And suddenly, what felt like slow-moving negotiations become a ticking clock with no buffer. This is where things often spiral, not because either side wants chaos, but because momentum takes over. Once deadlines are missed, narratives harden, public sympathy shifts, media framing turns sharper, words like dispute get replaced with standoff, and every day without basketball starts to feel less like strategy and more like failure. What makes this moment especially dangerous is how unprepared the public is for it. Fans don't realize how close the league already is to the edge of that cliff. There's no countdown graphic on television, no emergency press conference warning people what's coming, just the assumption that things will get worked out the way they always do. But always doesn't mean much when the league has never been here before with this much at stake.
Once January 9th passes without a deal, every rumor carries more weight. Every report of tension feels amplified. Players speaking out no longer sound hypothetical. They sound urgent. And the league's silence stops feeling strategic and starts feeling ominous. That shift alone can do damage before a single game is officially canceled. There's also the downstream effect people underestimate. Sponsors hesitate. Networks pause promotional planning. Expansion timelines get questioned. Investors who were confident a month earlier suddenly want reassurance. None of that requires an official lockout to begin. The uncertainty itself is enough to slow everything down. And this is where the pressure quietly multiplies, because now both sides aren't just negotiating with each other, they're negotiating in front of fans, partners, and a media ecosystem that thrives on conflict. Every day past the deadline increases the cost of compromise. Not because the issues change, but because backing down becomes harder once lines are publicly drawn. That's why January 9th isn't just a legal marker, it's a psychological turning point. Before it, there's still room for quiet resolution. After it, everything becomes louder, messier, and far more difficult to control. And once players started describing how far apart the two sides actually are, it became clear just how close that turning point really is. Strip away the headlines and the talking points, and the real fight comes into focus fast. This isn't about vague fairness, it's about money and movement. How players get paid and how they get from city to city. Two issues that sound simple, but touch every nerve in the league. Start with travel, because it's the most visible and the hardest to defend. Right now, most WNBA teams still fly commercial during the regular season. That means early morning departures, layovers, cramped seats, and unpredictable delays. All of it layered on top of elite athletic performance with little recovery time. For players, this isn't an inconvenience, it's wear and tear that shows up in bodies, injury risk, and longevity.
And in a league that finally has stars people want to see on the floor, that risk feels unacceptable. Players aren't asking for luxury, they're asking for parity. The NBA solved this problem decades ago. Full charter access isn't debated there, it's assumed. So when WNBA players point out that they're generating record attention and revenue while still navigating commercial travel, the optics are brutal, especially to new fans who assume top-tier athletes are already treated like professionals across the board. Then there's the money, and this is where things get more complicated. The current revenue sharing system isn't a clean split. It's a formula layered with thresholds, guarantees, and caps that made sense when the league's growth was slower and more uncertain. But now, with new media deals looming and expansion fees soaring, players want clarity. They want a defined share of the upside they're helping create. From the league side, the argument sounds cautious, even reasonable on paper. Commissioner Kathy Engelbert has consistently stated that the WNBA has operated at a loss for much of its existence, supported heavily by the NBA. The message is simple. Growth is real, but profits aren't guaranteed yet. Locking in aggressive spending too early could backfire if projections don't hold. Players see it differently. They argue that this is the moment to invest, that improved travel, better pay, and stronger working conditions aren't rewards for growth, but drivers of it. Better performance leads to better games. Better games lead to higher ratings. Higher ratings strengthen future negotiations. From their perspective, waiting for perfect financial certainty means missing the window entirely. That gap in philosophy is why negotiations feel stuck. It's not that either side is wrong, it's that they're operating on different timelines. Players are looking at the surge happening right now. The league is looking at sustainability 5 and 10 years down the road, and neither side wants to be the one that blinks first. When players like Kelsey Plum describe the talks as dispiriting, it's not posturing, it's frustration with how far apart those timelines feel. Charter flights symbolize respect and safety. Revenue share symbolizes recognition and trust. And when those things aren't guaranteed, it sends a message that clashes with the league's public image of growth and progress.
This is the battleground where compromise gets hardest. Because money and travel aren't abstract ideas. They affect daily life. They affect careers. And once those issues are framed as non-negotiable, walking back demands becomes emotionally and politically expensive. Which is why one person's voice suddenly mattered more than anyone expected. Because when you look at who isn't financially desperate, who does have options, and who still chose to stay, the entire conversation shifts. What gives Caitlin Clark's voice so much weight in this moment isn't just her popularity, it's her leverage, and the fact that she chose not to use it the way everyone expected. Clark didn't need the WNBA to be her only option. She had alternatives, real ones. Overseas opportunities that would have paid more. High-profile offers that would have insulated her financially without ever stepping onto a WNBA court. Endorsements alone could have carried her career comfortably for years, but she still chose this league. That decision quietly changes everything, because it reframes her comments in a way no talking point can. She's not speaking from desperation. She's not fighting to stay afloat. She's speaking from a position of security, and that makes her warning impossible to dismiss. When someone with options says, "We need to find a way to play," it doesn't sound like pressure. It sounds like foresight. This is what separates her from nearly every other voice in the conversation. Clark isn't protecting league executives, and she isn't undermining player demands. She's protecting the future she deliberately bought into. By choosing the WNBA, she tied her prime years to its success. She aligned her brand, her legacy, and her competitive goals with a league that's still defining itself. That gives her an unusually clear view of what's at risk if things fall apart now. It also puts her in a rare middle space. She understands the player side because she is the player side. She's experienced the grind, the travel, the scrutiny, the pressure. But she also understands the business side because she's lived the attention cycle firsthand. She's seen how quickly interest can surge and how easily it can move on. That dual perspective is why her words landed differently. They weren't ideological, they were practical. There's also a symbolic layer here that's easy to miss. Stars like Clark are the proof investors, broadcasters, and fans point to when they talk about the league's future. She represents what the WNBA can become. When someone like that publicly acknowledges the risk of losing momentum, it forces everyone else to confront it too. Because if even the league's biggest draw is worried about timing, that worry isn't abstract anymore. Her choice to stay also removes a common excuse. It's easy to dismiss criticism when it comes from someone threatening to leave. It's much harder when it comes from someone who stayed on purpose. Clark isn't hedging, she's committed, and commitment gives credibility. It tells fans this isn't noise or drama, it's concern from someone who wants this league to work as much as anyone in the room. That's why her comments lingered long after the practice ended, because they weren't about winning a negotiation. They were about protecting a rare alignment of talent, attention, and opportunity. An alignment that doesn't come around often and doesn't wait for perfect timing. And when you look at the basketball itself, the product that all of this is supposed to support, the urgency becomes impossible to ignore. If you want to understand what's truly on the line, stop listening to negotiations and watch the basketball. The footage coming out of Team USA camp said more in a few minutes than weeks of statements ever could. No elaborate schemes, no polished game plans, just elite players sharing the floor for the first time in months and instantly creating something people couldn't stop talking about. You see Caitlin Clark pulling up from deep with that same effortless release, the kind that makes defenders hesitate the moment she crosses half court. You see Paige Bueckers gliding into space, knocking down contested shots like it's second nature. You see Angel Reese battling inside, bringing that physical edge that turns routine possessions into moments. None of this is theoretical. This is the product, fully alive, even without the structure of a real season. What's striking is how little context is needed for it to work. These players don't need perfect conditions to generate excitement. They barely need familiarity. The talent alone carries the moment. Fans clip it, share it, debate it. That's how buzz is created in modern sports. And it's fragile, because buzz doesn't survive long gaps. It needs constant reinforcement. This is exactly what fans were missing during the offseason. Not negotiations, not headlines, basketball, competitive reps, stars going at each other, the chemistry forming in real time. The kind of moments that pull casual viewers deeper and turn interest into attachment. Every practice clip reminded people why the 2024 season felt different and why the idea of losing an entire year feels unthinkable.
And that's the cruel irony. Even without official games, the excitement is obvious. Imagine what happens when this level of play is tied to standings, rivalries, playoff races, and sold-out arenas. Imagine building on that instead of freezing it in place. Because once momentum like this stalls, restarting it isn't as simple as flipping a switch. Team USA will move forward no matter what. International competition will continue. Stars will still train. But the WNBA is the engine that gives all of this meaning week after week. It's where fans build routines, storylines grow, and players become household names. Remove that engine, and everything else loses context. That's why the basketball itself feels like the loudest argument in the room. It's proof of what's working, proof of what people are showing up for, and proof that the cost of losing a season wouldn't just be financial, it would be emotional. A broken connection between fans and a product that finally feels essential. And when you step back and look at the asymmetry of what could happen next, it becomes clear why this moment leaves no room for error. This is the moment that defines what the WNBA becomes next. Not a single game, not a single contract, not even a single season. This is about whether the league understands the weight of the opportunity sitting right in front of it. Because moments like this don't announce themselves twice. They arrive quietly, demand clarity, and punish hesitation. No one wins if basketball stops. not the players, who lose irreplaceable time during the most valuable years of their careers, not the league, which risks erasing hard-earned trust from fans who just started paying attention, and not the sport itself, which has spent decades fighting for consistent visibility only to finally find it at the worst possible time for internal conflict. That's what made Caitlin Clark's words resonate beyond the gym. She wasn't calling for surrender. She wasn't dismissing the fight for better conditions or fair compensation. She was reminding everyone of the foundation that makes those fights meaningful: games, fans, momentum. Without those, every negotiation becomes smaller, weaker, and easier to ignore. The scary part is how thin the margin really is. One miscalculation, one prolonged standoff, one season lost at the wrong time. That's all it takes to shift perception from "this league is ascending" to "this moment passed." And once that narrative sets in, reversing it takes years, not months. This is where leadership matters, where ego has to give way to timing, where compromise isn't a loss, but a strategy. The league has to show it values its players not just in words, but in action. Players have to protect the stage they're standing on, even while pushing it to make it better. That balance is uncomfortable, but it's necessary. Because the future of women's basketball isn't theoretical anymore. It's visible, it's loud, it's filling arenas and timelines and conversations that used to exclude it entirely. Letting that future slip away over stubbornness or short-term thinking would be a mistake the sport would talk about for decades. The question now isn't whether growth is real. It is. The question is whether the people in charge recognize how fragile it still is. Because Caitlin Clark understands what's at stake. The fans understand it too. The only question left is whether everyone else figures it out before time runs out.